Hey everyone, my name is Todd Blyleven, and we are seconds away from I'm Going In Starting Up. It's the newest podcast sharing stories of adversity, strength, and love from some amazing guests. So here we go. Are you ready? Three, two, one. Hey, welcome back to I'm Going In. I'm Todd Blyleven, and I've got an incredible guest. Michael Grasso is on. Michael's a retired lieutenant firefighter out of Southern Connecticut. He split time between being a rescue, working with the rescue ladder company and engine. He was injured in 2019, which required him to undergo cervical fusion. That eventually led to his retirement. He's an entrepreneur, which we're going to get into, making incredible knives. And he's a rope enthusiast, but he's a husband and a father. Michael, thank you so much for being on. It's truly an honor. Thank you, number one, for what you did with your community and serving as a firefighter and for our country. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We talked a little bit off camera about, what this is all about, the I'm going in moment, right? And I've had a few firefighters on now that we've really kind of centered around that moment that you guys, you got to put that uniform on and you got to mentally prepare. And I've kind of related that to like an athlete preparing for a game. You're
Mhm.
prepping up and you're doing your stretching and your mental performance stuff, and you're going in day out, and all of a sudden that bell rings for you guys, and you're jumping into fire truck and you're heading off. And
Mhm.
generally, from what you know people don't know, especially about first responders, is each and every single one of you experiences trauma almost daily. And with the firefighter community, you generally are with 4 or 5 other people, uh, teammates, firefighters that experience that same level of trauma as what you are experiencing. Everybody copes with it differently,
Mhm.
of course. But then you go back to the firehouse, which has been like, that's your sanctuary, right?
Mhm.
Let's just get back to the firehouse. Let's debrief ourselves. Let's have dinner.
Mhm.
Some fire departments or houses have traditions where they'll go get like an ice cream cake or
Mhm.
something else to, like, after, especially after a horrific call,
Mhm.
to kind of process things in a way that you guys are able to do that. But yet there's still this trauma that's happening, right? And you still have to be a father or go
Mhm.
back into real life. And I know
Mhm.
I mentioned to you, I've been so blessed to have been around so many great people in your line of work, that we were drinking buddies or we're pals. We go out and go out in the outdoors, or we go throw the ball around or whatever that is.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, when I had my traumatic experience in Las Vegas, the human part of them, uh, I was embraced with all of that. The
Mhm.
stories, the relatable
Mhm.
stories that I was going through when I was knocked down,
Mhm.
their stories helped me stand back up, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And help me announce to myself, I'm going into this, I'm going into therapy,
Mhm.
things like that. So I let's talk about some of the incidences that you had when you were a firefighter, some of those accidents, and then I'd really like for you to get into the aftermath, because you retired at an early age, and it
Yeah.
was forced medical retirement. I've got
Mhm.
a buddy in Rockland, California, that retired medically because of that same type of situation, and it hurt him. He
Mhm.
went through massive depression. And
Yeah.
so I'd like for you to, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
let's talk about it. And you're a faith believer just like myself too. So I think the majority of our listeners need that if they don't
Mhm.
already have it. So let's talk about that too. But
Yeah. Well, I
why
wish I
did you
could say
start? Let's
that.
start with this. Why
Go
did
ahead.
you become a firefighter?
No, that's a super good question.
Yeah.
My so my father's a fireman. He's
Oh,
been a fireman for 40 years. He's a chief now, in a department that wasn't far from where I ended up getting hired. And I really didn't know what I really wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be in the military. I wanted to be a SEAL. Yeah, I had these aspirations, but I wasn't prepared for that lifestyle. My personality, I wanted to be a cop, and my dad had been a cop prior to being a firefighter, so he kind
mm,
of he had some perspective to offer me, and he's like, listen, he's like, you can do whatever you want. He's like, but I'm telling you right now, you don't want to be a cop. He's like, you don't have the right personality. He's like, it changes you in ways you're not going to appreciate until later. So he's like, why don't you think about being a firefighter? And I was working as a carpenter at the time because I was homeschooled, right? And so that allowed me the ability to start an apprenticeship with my uncle, who was a carpenter I was like 12. And so I did that for 10 years before I became a firefighter. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue being a carpenter or not. Yeah, I kind of saw like what that did to your body, and I was like, I don't know. And so he encouraged me when I was 15 to join the local volunteer fire department in the town that I grew up in. So instantly, I think what attracted to me to that when I got there was just because you can't do much as a cadet or someone who's under 18. There's things you can do, but there's things they absolutely will not allow you to do. So
Mm.
just kind of meeting the people and kind of getting into that small little brotherhood, I guess you could say, that was cool for me. But yeah, I didn't really try very hard. I took a couple tests locally, and it wasn't it's not something that I was born desiring to do. It kind of found me, and I kind of just said, okay, this is cool, it's exciting, I like doing kind of dangerous things, and it allowed me that opportunity. So
Wow. And
yeah.
so when you're a cadet, just because we haven't really talked too much about this, are is that what's that daily routine like? Is it basically just rolling up the hoses? Is it cleaning and helping guys where they need to, or do you go out? And you probably, like me, when I was growing up and being around, professional athletes, I got a chance to see their darkest moments too, when they had failure
Yeah,
or they had the success. So you probably saw that too.
a little bit. Yeah, I think if I can remember, this is going back now. So I have a little bit of amnesia from, and we'll get into that. So stuff's kind of it comes to me, but I remember yeah, as a cadet, you're not doing much. I mean, I got my EMT very early. I think when I was 16, I was allowed
Mm.
back then to get my EMT. So that gave me the opportunity. If I couldn't do a lot of firefighting stuff, I could go on the ambulance and run calls. So that's one of the first things I started doing. And on top of that, yeah, you're not going to structure fires. You're not legally allowed to in the state of Connecticut until you're 18. So I just lived my life on the bus, they call it, the ambulance, those first couple years, and just really got a lot of experience doing that. But yeah, rolling hose, cleaning stuff at the firehouse. I mean, again, it's volunteer, so there's not a huge commitment, but there was a drill night. And then I just spent every waking hour there, though. I mean, just that
Mm.
was my personality. You know what I mean? It was my escape from work and like other things at that age. That's what I did. That's kind of what I embraced myself in. So
So but your dad was, had experienced law enforcement and then
yeah,
fire. So you grew up in that household.
yeah,
Seeing him, and we're not going to speak for him or anything
yeah,
else, but as a son,
yeah,
did you probably saw sometimes where maybe he probably had a bad night or
yeah,
there was maybe a change, but then was was he like every other first responder where you flip it and like, okay, I'm dad.
yeah.
You spin the hat around. How was that growing up?
Yeah, I don't. There's definitely a few memories of him when he came home and I could just tell something would be different. He
Mm.
was upset, or I'd go upstairs to my parents' room to like knock on the door and open the door, and he's crying, in bed talking to my mom. Very very few times, but I never really saw it affect him
Yeah.
in any like super negative ways. He didn't have any bad habits or addictions. I mean, that's that I was aware of.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think he handled it very well, but I grew up in the firehouse that he worked in, and I say grew up because like we used to live across the street from the firehouse when I was very young.
Oh,
So he'd
wow.
get up, pack his bag, and walk to work, and every time he went out, I'd see the fire trucks going by. Later, we moved a little further away, but I spent a lot of time at that firehouse. So similar to you saying how you grew up around your dad and those men, like they were giants to me.
Yeah.
I
That's,
remember.
yeah.
I almost feel like I could get emotional because I remember like just being like, man, these guys are like larger than life. You know what I mean? And this
Yeah.
is back in, I'm 36 years old. So this is back in, the early 90s, when I'm old enough to remember this kind of stuff. But the culture was a lot different back then, and a lot of these
Yeah.
guys some of these guys were like Vietnam War vets. and just hard men that were physically capable and just like, you don't mess around with them.
Yeah.
So that was always
Wow.
very awe-inspiring for me going there because I'm just like, these guys are literal superheroes.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
true kind of aspiration of what a man looks like,
Yeah.
coming out. I mean, I could just see it in my mind. Like these guys got their coats on and their
Yeah.
helmets and their, I don't know. Do
Yeah.
they slide down the poles back
They
then? Do you
had a
guys still
pole.
slide
Yeah.
down poles?
They had one, and I was luckily one of the stations I worked in my department, we had a pole. They're very few and far between. But yeah, they had one. So yeah,
What was
watching
that
them.
like?
It from which end? As a kid or as an adult?
As a kid and an adult. I mean, there as a kid, you're probably having a blast. Now as an adult and you're
It's
going out.
different.
Yeah.
It's different as an adult because as a kid, and again, it's a different time period. So that pole was like in the room where they slept, and they could, if I remember correctly, they could just get up, hit the pole, go down, and jump on the rig. Right.
Wow.
So, and I got to see that as a kid, but when I years later was I was on the job and I worked in the station where we had a fire pole. I mean, a lot more safety regulations and stuff had gone into place. So now it's like in like a closet, you got to press a button to open it. There's all these safety things. So it's kind of more of a pain in the butt to use it
Run down the
versus just taking
stairs.
the stairs. Exactly. So I would do it
Yeah.
occasionally, but when you're tired, you got to make sure you're holding on to that thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because
Yeah.
I mean, it's only a 12-foot drop, but I mean, you're hitting a concrete floor. So it
Yeah.
was cool. It was a cool nostalgic thing for me.
So I always, I'm enthralled about like firefighters. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys normally have kind of your boots and your stuff ready to go, right? Because you're normally in just like your
Yeah.
normal like blue or whatever kind of clothes.
Yep.
And then once that bell hits, you're like jumping in. This is how I envision it.
Mm-hmm.
You're jumping into the boots, you're pulling
Mm-hmm.
up the
Mm-hmm.
pants, you're putting on your jacket,
Mm-hmm.
you're buttoning yourself up. And I kind of think about that like in a sports sense, where here I am, I'm a running back, and I've talked to guys like Jamal Charles and different people about when they put that mouth guard in,
Mm-hmm.
that's game time. Or when I would step on the mound and I'm getting ready and I get that sign, I'm
Mm-hmm.
instantly transported and everything closes in. So
Mm-hmm.
that mental approach, is that when that hits for you guys, when you are getting all that stuff strapped up and you're ready to jump into the rig? Like
Mm-hmm.
explain that process mentally, because where I want to go with that is, here you are, you're sleeping, you're watching TV, the bell goes off.
Mm-hmm.
Instantly, you have to switch from whatever just was going on. You're having family issues,
Mm-hmm.
whatever else. And now it's game time in
Mm-hmm.
terms of
Mm-hmm.
real life for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go out to these calls. And where I want you to maybe go with us, please, is you maybe your first couple times when you've experienced real trauma mentally on you don't have to go into what it was,
Sure.
but in terms of the feelings of it. And then when you're taking that stuff off, now you're setting back into real life. What was that like? How did you process that? Who was there for you? What resources did you use to kind of allow yourself to walk forward again? If you don't mind, start from the moment you're like putting it on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Keep me on track because those were
Yeah.
those are really good questions. I
Yeah.
think they're super important. Yeah, for me, everything is about patterns, right? And it might be similar in the sports world where you don't want to have to think about the basic things because it distracts you from handling like the pressure, right, of what you're going to face. So for me, and I can't speak for everybody, but for
Yeah.
me, when the tone went off, it was just like, okay, you know what I mean? And that changes throughout the years because you get a little, I don't want to say lackadaisical or apathetic, but you don't get as excited because 9 times out of 10, what comes over the radio is not what you encounter.
Oh, wow.
So it becomes less of a jolt and more of like, all right, here we go. You know what I mean? But for me, it was in my shift particularly, I had a boss that was really good about keeping us, because people do funny things under stress, even in that job environment. So if you hear something bad, people start cracking jokes and like trying to lighten it,
Lighten it up.
but yeah, lighten it up. But that can distract you from what you're going to do. So my boss was always good about, hey boys, focus. Where are we going? What are we doing? You know what I mean? What's your job? So it was very. I learned from that, and that's kind of what some of the leadership maybe role I adopted was just when that tone goes off, like forget everything else. Just all you have to do is focus on that task. And I miss that a lot, because when all you have to worry about is like this one thing and knowing exactly what's expected of you, it's hard to find that other areas of life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was in my day of firefighting versus my dad's, they would keep a lot of their gear, their boots, like next to their bed. So the tone
Okay.
went off, you turn, drop your feet in your boots, pull up your straps, go downstairs, throw on your coat, and get in the rig. Well, there's been a lot of studies about cancer and toxic chemicals and all this kind of stuff. And so we've tried to, in my time on the job, separate a lot of the contaminated stuff from our living space. You know what I
Got it.
mean? So for us, it was tone goes off, out to the rig. Do we need to wear the gear, right? Because you don't have to wear the gear for every call.
Right.
And then it was get dressed right there at the rig. But for me, it was always very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it, but it was very structured,
Yeah.
right?
Consistent.
Consistent, the way I put
Yeah.
my stuff on, because if I did it the same way every single time, it freed up bandwidth, if I could use that
Yeah.
term, to focus on other things, especially when I became a lieutenant. I didn't want to have to worry about anything else but what my role was. So I became very focused.
So yeah, no, you're routine driven. I mean,
Yes.
it's very similar to how, you talk to like executive leadership in business roles. They have a routine, right, on their daily process and
Yep.
how they attack each day. It
Yep.
starts with making your bed,
Yeah.
and putting their socks on or whatever else. But
Right.
with you guys, there's this, like you said, it basically eliminates everything else so that way you can have the bandwidth to now process yourself and be prepared mentally good to go into this moment. And
Yeah.
because there's no like futuristic video being shown, you don't get to see like a movie trailer of like, oh, okay, I know we're going to get in and it's going to, we're going to be on the left side of this and I'm going to run out and there's
Hmm.
none of that, right? So you're basically going on call. Everything is scripted in terms of what your chief and everyone's telling you what to do. So you all have roles and responsibilities. But talk about maybe the first couple times as a new firefighter compared to, like you're mentioning later, when maybe things got a little bit more numb, you learned
Hmm.
how to deal with things. But talk
Hmm.
about in the very beginning, some of your more and again, you don't have to go into the traumatic the uh the minute by minute and the details of it, the
Hmm.
gore of it, because we don't
Hmm.
want to set triggers off with
Hmm.
anybody. But talk about, give an overview of maybe one or two incidences that you came on as a young firefighter
Hmm.
and walked away from that going, holy cow, what did I just see?
Hmm.
How do I process this now? And how do I
Yeah.
go home?
Hmm.
Um, and then let's start there, because then I
Okay.
want you to talk about later when
Yeah.
had more years in and
Yeah.
how that process, what you did routine wise
Hmm.
after that,
Hmm.
that then allowed your mental
Hmm.
capacity to kind of process things easier.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that early on I understood what trauma was, or what the potential second, third order consequences of seeing and experiencing the types of things were, but I was clueless.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I didn't think about it. There's a few calls. I mean, my first call as a volunteer at like 16 years old was somebody who committed suicide by letting a train take off their head.
Oh,
You know what I
geez.
mean? So that was like my
Yeah.
first call. And I have a lot of things to say about that in as far as like people and organizations, what they used to allow. I would do things differently now. Like if my son said, "Hey, Dad, I want to be a volunteer at 15," I'd be like, "No, no." You know what I mean? Like, or be very, very supervised. But um,
Why? Because of the mental side of that, of just,
you're not
you're
prepared to
not
handle
prepared.
that.
Yeah.
You don't know. th- Anytime, every time you experience trauma, whatever it is, you're taking the brick of that trauma and you're sticking it in your backpack.
Yeah.
And some of those bricks are really big and some of them are small, but they all add up. And at some point, there's a reckoning. At some point, you can no longer carry that load. And so that's what I think, if, looking back, I would have managed things a little better. But I was excited. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to see. You're a young man, like a soldier that wants to go to war. It's like, I don't want to see bad things to happen to bad people, but I've been trained to do a job and I want to do my job.
Yeah.
I want to not mainly because I love helping people. I've learned that about myself. Like what truly gives me fulfillment and purpose is like being a servant, and I
Hmm.
realize now looking back on that job, that's what I got some fulfillment out of was being able to serve the people and also just my fellow firemen than it was when I was a boss, being able to serve them that way. But I didn't think about it at all. But there were certain calls. I remember one in my professional career early on was a fatal accident where this young lady was on the highway, got distracted, rear-ended a tractor trailer, and it was like instant, like, it came through the windshield. She was in a smaller car and really messed her up. But I remember she was the same age as my wife. And my wife and I
Wow.
was young. I got hired by my department when I was just had turned 21. I mean, like
Wow.
I turned 21 a month later. I went to Fire Academy and then was on, was working. But I remember that's the one that kind of stands out as like that could have been my wife. You know what I mean? I remember
Yeah.
thinking about that, but then it was just like, okay, whatever, but it's not big deal. You know what I mean? But that call stayed with me years later in different ways because my officer, and this is where my officer, we got to the scene and he knew what was going on, but he's like, oh, new guy, go check it out. Like, if the roles were reversed, like when I was a boss, it was like, I'm gonna check this out. And if I can shield you from this, I will do that. So that was just a leadership lesson I learned in that.
Yeah.
Um, because I remember being like looking at her and just being like, please don't be alive. You know what I mean? Just the trauma
Yeah.
to her face. I'm like, if you're alive, I mean, this is going to be terrible for you and for us to try to resuscitate you. And, thankfully she wasn't, but yeah, just that image is in my mind. And then just the smell of, you talked about the burning turf, right? Like that's in
Yeah.
your mind from those bullets. For me, it's a lot of it is, battery acid, transmission fluid, those type of smells are all connected kind of that stuff. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I didn't, I didn't realize the weight of that until later in my career. And then I definitely approach things differently.
So when after an event, a traumatic event, what's the process that you guys would go through then? And then towards the end of your career, how did that shift? And you're probably still connected because your dad, are
Yeah.
you seeing this pattern kind of change where there's more emphasis on, the well-being of the aftermath? So what happened before? How did you process that? Did you have routines with somebody responsible for helping you kind of manage that? And then what are you seeing today?
I mean, the short answer to that question,
Yeah. Yeah.
no. And I mean, as
Oh,
far as back
wow.
then, no. There was
Mm.
no, yeah, I think they called it critical incident stress
Yeah.
debriefing, CSID. There was none of that. It was a good kid. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like you did not talk about it. Um, so that was probably the first, I mean, especially as a volunteer, right? I was 15 and up, and then you know, it wasn't until halfway through my career where I feel like our department really started taking it a little bit more seriously. But even then, it's like guys have to be willing to want to talk and do that. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, it takes time to change culture, right? The joke about the fire service is I think it's 100 years of history unimpeded by progress. That was always the joke because we didn't like change. And so because of the culture of, and it all stems back, I think, to earlier cultures, talking about like the men that worked with my dad, these Vietnam vets, where they just sucked it up. You know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
had nothing for the most part. I know there was some things, but that's taken a long time to break that cycle. Um, and so I wish I could say I had some sort of system for dealing with it. Probably towards the end of my career, probably year 12 or 11, I did start talking to somebody, because I remember talking to one, and I'm an officer, and I'm talking to one of our more senior guys who was a vet, and he'd been to war and he had seen and done some things, so he was a cool guy to talk to. But I remember being like, uh, "Yo, Pete, I need to talk to somebody. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know where to go. I don't know who to talk to." And then he ended up giving me the number to his his therapist, and so I met with her and did EMDR, and that kind of stuff definitely helped. But
What kind did you do?
um, what
Was it
kind of
audio or
EMDR?
the paddles? The
We would
tapping?
do the light bar and the paddles. I think that's what we did. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably 6 years ago or so. So yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So but they're definitely more proactive now. But
Yeah.
again, like you have, it's like it's almost like being an addict in a way. And I've suffered a little bit of addiction, so I think I can speak to that. And with trauma, it's similar. Like you have to want to get better.
Yeah.
Like you said, you have to want to say, I'm going in, I'm gonna go do this because I don't want to be a victim, I want to be a victor. I'm not saying everyone has a victim mindset, but there's only so much they can do.
Yeah.
But if culture has shifted, I have seen it change and I have seen people embrace it more for sure.
Well, you brought up the backpack analogy is so perfect with like the bricks, right?
Yeah.
And each time that we experience trauma or just some sort of difficulty in our lives, you're packing a brick in, whether it's a small pebble or it's a
Or
big
this.
ass brick, yeah,
Yeah.
boulder, you're lugging that thing around. And I know for me, and it's still today, and I always like to try to keep my trauma in front of me because I've recognized the signs on how I start to feel inside.
Yeah.
So I know my breathing techniques. I know I need to pray more. I need to be able to like separate myself and calm things down or separate from a
Mhm.
situation,
Mhm.
because I've got that trauma in front of me. I've
Mhm.
worked really hard to get to that moment,
Mhm.
but that's what I wanted to do. I was going in for that. But when I first got back, that pounding, the headaches, the trying to like hold it all in, because I was raised too to suppress all my emotions. You're tough. I've
Yep.
pitched with broken ribs. I've pitched
Yep.
with cut open fingers. You don't do, you just go out and do, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, you ignore
Yeah.
pain. But all of a sudden, like you said, you got to that moment where you're like, hey, I need some help.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah.
When you went into the therapist, obviously it was a recommendation from a friend.
Mhm.
Sometimes, though, even if it's a recommendation, sometimes you can't get past that 8 seconds. We would talk about it a
Yeah.
lot. Like, I need to be able to unload this and know that what I'm about to tell you, you're going to take, and
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to feel comfortable because
Yeah.
that's the only way therapy is really going to work. It
Yeah.
sounds like that worked for you.
Mhm.
um, have you had friends that maybe have gone to therapy and said, "Man, this isn't for me,"
Mhm.
and do they end up going back?
Um,
Because
I
it's a
don't know.
hard thing it's a hard thing to say I need help first.
Yeah, it's yeah, it takes some humility, you know what I mean? Because pride, especially in men, I think I know for me, I speak for myself, like, it's I'm a rock. I'm the rock. I'm not carrying rocks. I'm the rock. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Which that's what eventually I think I led to a lot of my issues. But I will say EMDR in the therapy, it was helpful, but at some point it became unhelpful. I really enjoyed my therapist. She's a beautiful woman, but I know for me, like that was good for a while, but that wasn't gonna solve my issues, and it didn't. It definitely helped, but it also created more. Especially when I started taking medication, going down that route,
mm,
like, and there's a time and a place for that. But for me, it was just a band-aid, and it eventually got ripped off in a really
yeah.
bad way. So yeah,
Well, by the way, you talk about being a man. So, just so everyone that's listening, I want to paint this picture. You're literally sitting in this badass like workshop, and you got all these tools behind you, wearing camo, by the way, with an American flag over your shoulder line and fire helmets. It's awesome, man. But
uh,
I I'm really thankful that you're so open about your mental health and what
mhm,
you experienced, because being a first responder is not easy, and I've seen that with a lot of my friends, and that's what I aspired to do. I ended up choosing my baseball path, but I've been thrown in. They a lot of people say that I'm an adoptive firefighter. I'm adoptive first responder
yeah,
because of what I did.
yeah,
But the aftermath of trauma, I think, just really hit. So it's important
mhm,
that we're recognizing that, and like you said, you got to want to do it,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
You got to want to
mhm,
do it. So let's
mhm.
talk about, you know the the incident that caused you to, end up having the fusion,
Mhm.
and then the really I don't want to say it was forced retirement, but it was, right? And
Yeah.
in terms of your
Yeah.
medical, and then how did
Yeah.
you deal with that mentally?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So right off the bat, so I didn't suffer any sort of traumatic injury at an incident. It was deemed like a cumulative injury that
yeah,
is like my body just finally broke.
yeah,
And my neck is what took that. That's where the weakest point was.
yeah.
But I think it's really important to say that also because you listen to podcasts, whether it's about military first responders, a lot of these guys have suffered what seems to be they've seemed to suffer like these traumatic things, right? These traumatic injuries. But there's a lot of us that just have suffered just a lot of cumulative abuse. So like, like I
Yeah,
said, the bricks in the backpack, whether
yeah,
that's emotional, psychological, or physical. So it's important to kind of say that that's just as worthy, uh, uh,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
It's just as
Law
worthy.
enforcement wearing those big belts. A
Oh my
buddy of
God,
mine has
yeah,
got back issues.
yeah,
Yeah, totally
every
agree. Yeah,
Oh, you
yeah,
know what I mean? So yeah. I just wanted that to be clear.
yeah.
I didn't have this thing, but over the course of my career, I did have a lot of things fall on my head in fires or do an overhaul, or I hit my head on a lot of things. Um, a lot of the weight that we carry as firemen all sits on our shoulders
Mm,
because your suspenders hold up your pants, your coat goes over that, and then you put your air pack on, and all that weight sits on your shoulders, and then you're carrying ladders, you're carrying things overhead, you're crawling around with a helmet on and a mask that's pulling you this way, and so you're looking around, and so it's very dynamic.
yeah,
It's not this linear thing, especially when it comes to injuries for guys. So
that makes
um
sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the pinnacle moment for me, and it wasn't anything super uh crazy, was I was teaching a newer fireman, our way of pulling off hose. I'm a lieutenant, I'm demonstrating, and all I did was reach up, grab the hose, and turn. And I just remembered feeling like a little bit of a pop, and just kind of being like, oh, my left arm feels a little weird, but it was nothing shocking. It was
Yeah.
nothing shocking. So sucked it up, right? I mean, I'm the type of person that my arm gets cut off, I'm just taping it back on and going to work. That was always, you just push through, right? That's
Yeah.
how I was raised. So, but quickly what happened is that pain kind of started to intensify. I always had neck issues. Most, like you brought up the example of cops and their gun belts. Like every cop and fireman, first responder has a back issue, a neck issue, something from just the stress of the job. And so I just kind of ignored it. But over the course of, like, I think I took a shift off because maybe I thought it was something else, and I came back to work. And so over the course of 2 weeks, the pain got so bad I wasn't sleeping.
Mm,
I was up like for a week. My arm was just in so much pain. I got a massage. I tried everything and it wouldn't go away. So I ended up getting some labs done just as a routine checkup. But they were like, "Hey, like your cardiac enzymes are like through the roof. Like is everything okay?" And I'm like, "Well, I've got this arm pain." And so they're thinking I'm having like a cardiac episode, right? Left arm
yeah.
pain, numbness, tingling. So I go to the ER, and after this long uh barrage of tests, they didn't really know what was going on, because also I was a lot bigger. I'm like 165 pounds now, but I was a 200-pound guy. I was a tactical athlete. They like to throw that around.
Yeah.
I was a lot bigger, a lot stronger, but my arm, it shrunk like in the course of a week. It went from being bigger to like my tricep disappeared, and it was super scary. So, well,
Mm,
long story short, they found that at the C6, C7 vertebrae, I had severe arthritis, basically a blown disc, and stenosis, which is the hardening or the narrowing of the passage that the nerve root from my left arm goes down. Hence why I was
okay.
having so many nerve issues.
Wow.
Um, and I luckily I went when I did. I had to get forced there, but the doctor who finally diagnosed me after all these tests was like, "Hey man, if you hadn't come in like maybe a couple days sooner, your left arm probably would have been paralyzed for life." So that's just a cool God thing where
Yeah, that's right.
it worked out just the right time that I got in there. So I have damage, permanent damage, but it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yep.
So well, I'm glad that you went in
Yeah.
and you got what you needed. That basically, with the demands of that job, obviously, I know my wife had neck surgery and had that
Okay.
fusion as well.
Yeah.
She was a hairstylist, constantly doing this, not lugging air tanks around and crawling
It's
around getting her
still
head banged up.
repetitive motion, you know?
But so you end up retiring, um, and you're so young, I mean, you're 36 now,
Mhm.
but you retired. What was that next step for you? And then I want you to go into a little bit of the COVID experience. So take us
Yeah.
from the aftermath. Did depression sit in? How do you define success? What did you kind of occupy? How did you recreate that success for you today, through that moment?
Yeah. So this is a wild story, and I'll try to do the Reader's Digest version, and then you can kind of pick at it. But let me first say that there's nothing that I have done to arrive where I'm at. I mean, I can say that like 100%. I was at a place where I thought I had to do everything to survive what we went through, but ultimately I can sit here right now and say I didn't do anything. The only thing I really did was submit myself to God in a way that I've never done before by giving up control because I had to control everything, right? Um,
Mm,
but I got that surgery, so it was like 2019, end of 2019 is when I kind of, got injured, had surgery in March, and I went back to work after recovering. I didn't retire right away. But backtracking just a little bit, I remember before my injury, not long before that, I remember telling my wife, like, I need a break. Like,
yeah,
I need a break. I don't, if I can't have a break, like, I'm gonna snap. And I didn't really
yeah,
fully understand why or what I was experiencing at the time, but I was just so stressed all of the time, trying to be that rock, kind of keep all the emotion inside, trying to keep all
yeah,
the trauma inside. Um, I mean, I never raised my voice at work, and I mean, I had a blowout with the guy where, and I don't swear a lot, where I'm screaming. It was bad, and that was right before my injury. And so I told my wife that, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I need a break. Well, lo and behold, like I get injured, and now I'm out of work for like 7 months.
you got a
And
break.
yeah, I got a break. I got a physical break and a literal break.
Yeah,
But it was beautiful because it showed me being able to escape that environment for that period of time. I mean, I was doing EMDR during the time. I went on some anxiety medication. Like I was a different person, and I was like, "What the heck? Like this is crazy. Like how is this possible?" And I do remember saying to my wife, like, "I don't want to go back to work. Like I don't want to go back to work. Like and that I shouldn't have gone back to work, but you know what I mean? The pride in me of wanting to be the rock and
yeah,
overcome and be a good example to my brothers and sisters at work. Like that's what I thought. I don't know if they thought any of that stuff, but for me, I had to do that.
yeah,
So I recovered. I went back to work about 7 months later, and this is right at the start of COVID, 2020. So I came back to work in July and I worked and I felt great. You know what I mean? I felt great. I felt physically strong. I was stronger than I've ever been in my life because I pushed myself so hard because I was so afraid that I was going to lose my career. And if I lost my career, I would lose my income. You know what I mean?
yeah,
What are the chances of me being actually getting a medical disability pension? Like slim to none because I know that the town is not going to want to give that up. I mean, my age group, I mean, I'm precedent setting, all these things. So I had all these fears in my mind. So I forced myself, went back to work. But once I got back in the schedule and the routine of not sleeping and the stress and the drama, it was probably 6 or 7 months where I was like, yeah, I can't do another 20 years. I also had permanent nerve damage. So if like if you're doing push-ups or weightlifting and you're like, oh, I can get like six more, like you hit that wall. Once I
yeah.
hit that wall, my arm would turn off. And so I would drop dumbbells on my face. I had this physical barrier where I couldn't rely on my body anymore. So that's what led to the decision for me to retire about 8 months later. And then it was a very long process.
I have a image of John Wayne that sits right here, and it says, "A man's got to do what a man's got to do." and that's what you did,
Yeah.
right? That's the feeling that we all have. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a man, I got to get in there. And I'm not saying that women don't do that, because they do. A
You
woman's got to
do.
do what a woman's got to do.
Yeah.
A person's got to do what a person's got to do. I
Right.
get it. But in that defining moment, you're risking everything that could potentially go wrong with you personally for the well-being of your family
Yeah.
and that future, right? Like,
Right.
I need a job. So
Yeah.
I need to jump in, even though it's going to be painful. So
Yeah.
thankfully, things worked out for you in terms of that exit. Now take us from that moment, and I want you to talk about how did the I want to make sure I say this right. The
Yeah.
Armis Knife and Tool Company come about, and was that pre-COVID or during your COVID? Because you literally are just now getting over
Yeah.
something horrendous. So I want you to talk
Yeah.
about that too,
Yeah.
as we're kind of wrapping up the show.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess very briefly, what happened was, after I decided to retire, that began the whole process. And when I submitted my stuff to the town, they were like, it was very clearly they did not want to play ball. Okay. So we began that battle at the end of 22,
Which is
or 20,
typical, by the way,
100%. And I
all
don't
the way
blame them.
across the
I
country.
don't
It's
blame them.
absolutely ridiculous
Yeah.
that you, as a first responder that puts your life out every single day for the well-being of us civilians, gets treated after the math of any type of injury. There's always this massive, big red tape that you guys need to go through. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's
So
tough.
I apologize for interjecting, but it drives me crazy because I hear it all the time and it's not fair. You guys should be treated way differently with that. So go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And so that legal, I guess, battle, I say,
Yeah.
began, but when as almost like as soon as it began in the fall of 21, I got super sick with COVID.
Wow.
And in me, so and then what that developed into was I got hit with COVID, I got double pneumonia, my kidneys were shutting down. I was
Holy
like
cow.
going, so I'm like, I'm gonna die, and the town is not going to have to give anything to my family because I'm dead. They'll be able to wipe their hands clean. There
Oh
can't be
my
any sort
God.
of court, legal, whatever. I didn't die, obviously, but what happened was I was so sick, and I immediately started not sleeping, like instantly. Something happened with COVID. I also came off a medication that probably didn't help, but it wasn't in my right mind, so I have withdrawals from an anxiety medication I was on. Um, so the entire time that the legal battle was being fought with the town, with our union and our lawyers and my lawyer and stuff, I was completely out of commission, completely out of commission. Um, I got deposed twice after not like, and I had zero sleep for 9 months, like zero sleep. I mean, we've all had sleepless nights. I've had 3 or 4 days at work where I didn't sleep, but no, I did not sleep a wink. So what happened, and I guess to kind of summarize that, because we could talk for hours about that, is every sense of control got taken away from me. My ability to fight for my pension, my ability to provide for my family, my ability to feel healthy, my ability to control anything was completely taken away. I had no control over anything. My wife had to become my full-time caretaker. I lost 70 pounds. I was very sick out of traumatic
Wow.
brain injury from not sleeping. So I wish I could say there was like this retirement, I got the pension, and now I'm like, okay, how do I process this? I didn't start processing any of the work stuff until earlier this year. And I've been
Wow.
retired I've been off the line for like 2 years. So it's
Unbelievable.
it's super, super interesting, everything that we've gone through. So yeah, I've been able to process that now, but it's not your typical like I've retired and I process this stuff. So it's been quite the journey. It's been quite the journey.
That's, I'm sorry that you went through all of that. Number one, definitely not deserving of it. Um, how much did faith play a role in your recovery?
Well, for me, I mean, it's been everything, but also at the same time, when I was going through it, I had zero faith, like none whatsoever, right? I was raised in faith, I claim to be this Christian and stuff, and I'm not. I just could not handle anymore. Like I could not fit anything else in that backpack, and I think COVID was like the last straw. I was stressed out of my mind that all these things were going to happen. COVID, all these things happen, and now it's like I'm dead. I'm screwed. You know what I mean? My family's screwed. All this kind of stuff. So I had zero faith, but like the hero of this story is my wife, because
Mm,
my wife has always had this incredible childlike faith her entire, I've known her since I was 19 years old. Um, and you know, I would always kind of give her a hard time about it, but you know, I regret that now because, you know, I see it, but she's the one that held on to faith that entire time. You know, I would be pleading with her like, Jackie, like, I cannot survive this. You know, humans cannot survive without sleep for this long. Like, it's inevitable that I'm going to die. I lost all this weight, all these issues, wasn't eating or drinking. Um, and I would get mad because I would be like, babe, I'm going to die. And she'd be like, no, you're not. She's
no.
like, I have faith that you're not going to die. And if you do, she's like, he's going to give me the power to resurrect you. So bring it on, you know? And I'll get so mad, but like there's that story in the Bible and the scriptures where the crippled man is lowered through the roof by his friends to be brought before Jesus to receive healing. And it's like that was my story. Like I had no faith. I had to rely on the faith of my wife and the community around us that carried, you know, me through that. And you know, my faith is so strong now because of that, but at the time I didn't have faith at all.
But sometimes we need that hand to be lowered.
Yeah.
And in that moment of darkness, we have to be able to reach up and grab it.
Yes.
And your wife kept her hand down.
Yes.
And maybe she didn't even reach for your hand. Maybe she reached for your shirt and just pulled your ass up
Yeah, she
and
did.
said, nope, you're not going anywhere. And
Yeah.
that's the power of it, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, you know, you can only do what you can do. So
Yeah.
um, powerful testimony of strength, not only with yourself and the perseverance that you've endured all the way through your injury, whether it was a traumatic incident or a elongated
Yeah.
process, it
Yeah.
happens all the time. It happens to everybody, right?
Hmm.
In all walks of life, construction workers, hairstylists,
Hmm.
teachers, people that are on their feet all the time, you know, workers in the subway stations. We all experience that trauma. And at some point, you got to be able to say, hey, I need to go in for myself here.
Yeah,
I need to be able to
absolutely.
get myself some help because I want to be able to provide.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden something happens to you where for 9 months you're stricken down
Hmm.
and all that worry and everything. And thank
Hmm.
God you had your wife to be able
Hmm.
to keep that hand down and hold you up and pull you up. So where you're at now, man, I was looking at that website and I'm going to post it up so our listeners will have it. It'll be on our description
Oh,
for
thank
our
you.
the
I love.
audio. But
Yeah.
talk about like where did this come from? Because it's dude, it's I'm a big knife guy. I
Oh,
love
cool.
knives.
Yeah.
Some of these are so really just badass. Where
Thank
did this
you.
come from?
So I've always had this weird, just I wouldn't call it obsession, but I've loved knives. I mean, I remember playing with my dad's when I was a kid, and I've just collected knives forever. And then in 2019, right before my injury, actually, I was like, I can make a knife. You know, I had a carpentry background, so I have built cabinets,
Yeah,
built houses. So I'm like, I can do this. Like, it's not that much different. And so I did the old YouTube University, you know, watched a bunch of
yeah,
videos. Right? Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, bought a few tools and made like my first knife. And when I made it, I was like, holy cow, like this is sick. You know what I mean? Like there was some weird connection. I brought it to work and showed some couple guys and they're like, you want to make me a knife? I'm like, yeah, sure. You know? So I just sold a couple and it was really cool. And it just started as a hobby that I kind of started launching into a business to do it for fun. But then the retirement thing happened, got sick, all that kind of stuff. So I really picked it up again the end of last year, early this year. And the beautiful thing about it is that it's been such a tool for healing for me.
I was
Given
gonna
what,
ask.
yeah, it's been
Yeah,
amazing. I mean, I've read, you know, the past couple of years, I'm a big reader. I love reading books. I've read a lot of books in the past, but, you know, last year I was at part of my recovery, just trying to read as many books as I can about the brain and the mind and how people recover from these massive strokes and head injuries. And one of the biggest pattern I noticed was like this creativity pattern where people are challenging their brain by using different parts of their body and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah.
anyway, just I remember when I just started, like, I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna try to make another knife. I'm gonna go in to my shop and just see what happens. And it was really super hard, and I would get very frustrated, and I could only do it for like 5 minutes at a time. But the more and the more and the more I did it, the easier it became. my brain healed in a lot of different ways from this traumatic, brain injury, quote unquote, that I had from not sleeping. And it taught me so many lessons about life because as a knife maker, right, you have a vision for the knife you want to make. Okay. And
Yeah.
tying this back to faith, right, with God and with our Father is I I realize now that he has a plan for me and he has a plan for all of us, right? And we don't know what the end result is, right? But it's almost like forging a knife. And every knife steel
Mm.
is different. It all requires a different recipe, right? Some steels need to be heated a lot hotter than others. And so what I recognized is that this picture of like instead of looking at what I've been through professionally, in my home, all the things, instead of looking at like, oh, I'm either a victim or this stuff happened to me. I'm like, yeah, it happened to me, but it happened for me. It didn't happen to me, it happened for me. It happened in order to forge me into who I am today. Because I mean, I sit here talking to you now. Yeah, things aren't perfect, but I'm a stronger, more capable man, emotionally, spiritually, physically, no anxiety other than the normal everyday, life stuff, no depression, and those crippled me my entire life. All that is gone. But it's because of what I walked through, my family walked through that forged us, just like making a knife.
There you go.
The knife doesn't know that all this stuff is happening to it in order to make this beautiful thing at the end of it. And so that's what I think has been the coolest thing for me is to see that. And it's beautiful if you think about it.
That is such a great story right there. Because I know a lot of, like myself, I dig into, poetry.
Yeah.
Wrote a country song and writing a book. I try to separate myself when things get a little bit too crazy. I get into the creativity side.
Mm-hmm.
Going into the sports technology side after after 2017 and the shooting, that saved me
Mm.
because I was a YouTube, I learned a lot of what I know. I built an application, I learned code, I learned all these cool digital marketing stuff, which I love on the baseball sports side. Became a sports analytics expert. But if I don't know that I would have done that if I didn't need that separation, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you said, what's so cool about like the next time someone holds one of your knives in their hand,
Mm.
the amount of each probably time you're pounding and the time and effort and the thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and the memories that you're somewhat pouring into that and
Yeah.
thinking about, man,
Yeah.
like that's on someone's hip or
Yeah.
that's so cool. Like
It's like it's a
that's
spiritual thing.
crazy.
I really think it is. And I honestly pray that every knife I send out like impacts somebody's life
Yeah.
somehow. Like,
Yeah.
Lord, let this be just a tool that I don't know, whatever it needs to do, like just let this, it might sound weird, but just let that thing take some of my experience and just like wash over them somehow, and affect
Yeah.
their life, and I've seen it. I think I've seen that a few times. So it's cool.
I always end my self prayers when I talk to God and Jesus and all the angels above, and I always, just tell God that I'm so thankful that we're bonded and we're forged
Yeah.
side by side. And one day I pray that when I pass on this earth, that my wings will spread and I can join the army of angels.
Yeah.
And just the forging really got to me too, with your knife making and stuff. Man, this was so cool to
Yeah.
meet you. You got a cool workshop, by the
Thanks.
way. So
Appreciate it.
uh, it's inspiring too. I think, if you're dealing with trauma, like this is another outlet too. Like, not don't get outside, go do your
Yeah.
things, but
Yeah.
find a little hobby like this
Yeah. Be
because that
creative. Yes.
creativity, like you said, so it's awesome.
We're
Great
made in the
lesson.
image of a creator. I believe that. And so why shouldn't we create?
Amen. So,
Yeah.
sir, thank you very much for everything. Lifelong friend, brother. Really,
Yeah.
like I'm gonna try to do whatever I can to amplify this, get
Wow.
people
Thank you.
to recognize your work as a creative master of knives and steel.
Oh boy.
Such a guy's guy. It's cool, man.
Yeah.
So thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
being on. I'm going in.
Awesome.